Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with George Ryan and Jack Woods, who are both consultants with us at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So today we're going to be talking about physical security. So my first question for you guys is, in a world obsessed with cyber threats, are organisations underestimating physical security?
I would say yes, they are. I think physical security threats probably don't get as much media coverage as cyber security threats. So I think that's probably where the main focus lies. But unfortunately, physical security is quite important as well. Because if someone can gain access to your physical site, it means that they can often potentially bypass some of the technical controls that you might put in place. So they could steal the devices, access unattended systems, plant rogue equipment, that kind of stuff, try and obtain sensitive information from the site itself. If you've got whiteboards, if you've got documentation lying around, that kind of thing, they might be able to obtain information that way as well. So while cybersecurity threats are really important and it does get a lot of attention, I do think that, physical security is underestimated.
Yeah, I think definitely. And it is amazing, isn't it, how far you can get with just a high-vis jacket and a hard hat.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone recalls, it was the Louvre, wasn't it, where they just pretended to be construction workers and, okay, they weren't stealing cyber, but it's dead easy to get things.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, whenever I go to site to visit clients and things like that, obviously generally you sign in at reception, but then it's a case of whether or not they come to collect you from the site reception, or whether you can just walk around willy-nilly, whether they hand out passes that have your picture on them and say that kind of this person must be escorted at all times, or whether they can go around the site unescorted, that kind of thing. So it is interesting when you go and visit sites and there's different controls in place. I was at a site on Wednesday, and I got given a green pass, which meant that I could walk around unescorted. I'd been there before and they knew me, so I kind of had that. So, but they operate, the organisation that run the site operates kind of a badge system for that. So green is escorted, red is unescorted, and blue is if you work there but you forgot your pass. Which is always good to really single out those people and make it obvious to them that they're forgetful.
And how have things like hybrid working, flexible offices and remote employees changed what physical security actually means?
Yes, I think ultimately whenever we think of physical, we kind of focus on the genuine physical offices that we have, but actually, you work from home, that becomes your home office. Well, actually you need the physical security controls there. So example of that is easy as actually making sure that you work from a room that you can lock if you need to. Given how it is at the moment, we have a lot of people that are in kind of shared housing situations, and you do have to prepare for that, because if you're on a sensitive client call, well, actually, can someone hear that because you've not put it into kind of place properly? I think, funnily enough, I was talking to someone the other week about they'd sent a proposal to a client, and actually they overheard someone on the same train as them talking about that client and what they were going to do. So obviously from there you get a lot of juicy information. It's just because you're not physically at the office doesn't mean physical security suddenly disappears.
Yeah, and I think the way that you should probably look at it is that the traditional security perimeter of an office space is what we were used to. The move to kind of the hybrid and flexible working, remote working, would mean that if you're in a public area, the perimeter of your office is that public area. So anyone in that vicinity will be able to hear you, and depending on where they're located, might be able to see your screen. So putting controls in place like screen filters, not taking kind of confidential calls in those public areas, that kind of thing, trying not to discuss private matters in those areas, because you wouldn't, if you were in a cafe, you wouldn't phone your doctor and be talking to them about all of your private medical information. You would go and find somewhere quiet to do that. And it's a similar thing should apply for client data. If you're working with a client, they won't want everyone in that Starbucks or everyone in that Costa knowing what you're talking to them about and telling them, oh yeah, you need to do this and implement these access controls, and now everyone knows what they're going to be doing. So yeah, I think the way to look at it is that the traditional physical security perimeter should then apply to wherever you are. So if you are in a coffee shop, that is your physical security perimeter, and there are people in there that are technically unauthorized viewers or listeners that can hear and see potentially what you're doing in those areas. So trying to kind of maintain that level of security is a bit more difficult, but you can add controls, so the screen filters and things like that, to kind of mitigate a bit of that.
I think you see it a lot, don't you, working away. Whenever I've stayed at the hotel and you go into the kind of bar to get your meal and you hear the team, some of the stuff you hear and you think, wow, that's really juicy, actually.
Yeah. And they treat it as like a social thing when realistically you are there to work. So the entire time you're there, you need to be aware of what you're talking about and who's in the vicinity of that. Because I've got like I've worked with clients and I've seen clients and people that work in kind of government roles and stuff as well, where they, depending on the classification of the information they're allowed to see, whether they're SC cleared and things like that, don't take their devices home. Or if they do take their devices home, they put them in a safe when they're finished working because there are requirements for them to do that. And so there are things that people can be doing, but it's just kind of thinking them through, evaluating the risk. A lot of people, when they've got classified or kind of top secret access to top secret information, won't take that device off the site, and most of the time they probably won't be allowed either. So yes, there are certain kind of business continuity aspects related there, but in terms of the security of that data, which is ultimately what we're striving for, that's the ultimate goal. So protecting that as much as you can is the physical security aspect.
So it's often said that humans are the weakest link in terms of security. Would you say that's still true, or are poor physical security processes and building design the bigger problem?
I think, yeah, they realistically they go hand in hand. If you've got staff that aren't managing visitors correctly, whether that's an awareness problem or it's just poor visitor management, they will still be that weakest link. There will be the physical aspect of it that they might be allowing unauthorized personnel or people on site, but ultimately they're probably still that weak link. Everyone's human. They make mistakes, so you can do all of the you can put controls in place until the cows come home, but if someone makes a mistake, they make a mistake, and those things happen.
I think it's similar to what we see in cyber, isn't it? It's, if someone can access something, they're always going to be an element in that security, because ultimately they have to be able to do the said thing. So without that, and again, example of it, we've had top secret buildings. It's been really unclear what they be to the outside eye, but actually from a physical security perspective, people go run around the army base and then track it on Strava, and then everyone kind of knows where the base is. So like Jack says, it's always going to be both, which is why no one control will solve everything. It has to be a holistic approach.
Yeah, I think I remember there was a French submarine. They were on a French submarine. There was a guy doing laps of the French submarine or a French destroyer, and he tracked it on Strava. And then obviously everyone then knew the location of that sub or destroyer. And it's just like, come on, switch on, guys. It's just things that you don't think about though, because I've been to sites before where like the weather's been nice and the people that I'm working with are like, oh, should we go out for a walk at lunchtime? And normally I would track a walk on a smartwatch, but they were like, oh, by the way, you can't track any of these walks because of where we are and what's located on site. You're not allowed to do any of that. And I was like, oh, okay, perfect, that's fine. So as long as there's an awareness there and people are told these things, the controls are there, and you would like to think that there's kind of enough common sense to fix it. But yeah, it's one of those things. humans are a weakness, unfortunately, and the chance of human error or even exploitation, if someone's successfully kind of socially engineered to let someone into the site, or someone kind of tags along and goes through some security gates and things like that, then it's difficult to manage. But ultimately, yeah, probably humans still, unfortunately, the weakest link.
And I think you've maybe shared one or two examples already, but what would you say is the most surprising physical security weakness that you've encountered, which could have led to a major information security breach?
So I knew of one which was quite interesting because I just don't think it had been considered at the time. But so organization in a shared building. So everyone was using the same supplier of lanyards, but actually what no one had checked was that the lanyards were set to have different access controls. So ultimately, if you had a lanyard, you could walk into any of the buildings, even the ones you're not supposed to, because actually it was just a binary. You either got access or not, rather than this location's off guards unless you've got this in place. Obviously, that was a panic when you go into the building, you see someone, you're like, I don't think you're supposed to be here. And again, it's not necessarily always malicious. So someone can actually do that by accident. You can get the wrong building by accident. But once you're there and you can see information, then it can turn malicious, because when I'm here, this looks really juicy, what's on the whiteboard, I'll take a picture, send it to my friends, that's quite funny, and then next thing you know, that's online everywhere.
Yeah, I've seen similar kinds of stuff. I've been into organizations before where they, like a finance department or a HR department, work from Monday to Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday they're not in the office, and the cleaners come in at the weekend. And then I've been in on the following Monday, and they've had a day off or whatever, and there's still kind of balance sheets and financial information left all over their desk. And I've kind of walked around and thought, well, if your cleaners were in at the weekends, if you've not vetted them and the landlord has, you don't know what level of vetting's taken place there. You don't know if they are just a cleaner in their kind of night time and they're a regular kind of 9 to 5 during the day. They might have 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and they might be accessing information that you don't want them having access to. And it's one of those things where ultimately you just need to be aware of it. That's why a lot of organizations try and implement a clear desk and clear screen policy to try and mitigate that and make sure people lock their documents away at the end of the day. The other issue with that is I've been into sites where staff are supposed to lock their documents away, and I've gone and tried to open the lockable drawers, and they're unlocked with the key in the drawer. So again, it's one of those ones where ultimately you've just got it's a bit of common sense. I've also been into organizations where the server has got the key in to open the server up and get into the rack, and it's like, well, why would you do that if it's a shared? Especially more and more often now, locations are shared because the overheads are too expensive to use an entire building, or you don't have the staff to use an entire building. So office locations are generally shared now, and you have a floor or half a floor in a building. And so making sure that your area is as secure as it can be physically makes life a lot easier in terms of managing physical security, making sure, or it reduces the likelihood that there's going to be a major information security breach because you've done as much as you can in your portion of that space to mitigate that, essentially.
What's one physical security control that most organizations think is effective, but in reality gives them little more than a false sense of security?
I think ultimately it's reliance on one single control is what gives the biggest false. So example of that, if you, for example, like Jack mentioned earlier, if you're relying on visitor badges, well, actually, have you got a process that at the end of the day you collect them so no one can keep them? Are you saying people can be escorted or not? If you're just relying on having a badge, then that's going to give you a false sense. Whereas actually what you need is you need the awareness, the culture where people actually will challenge someone if they can't visibly see a badge. So ultimately, I would say it's, as always in cyber, over-reliance on one control to save everyone is probably where you have the biggest false sense of security.
Yeah, I agree. I think another thing that kind of gives organizations a false sense of security is, like I mentioned earlier, a reception desk that doesn't do active verification, doesn't check that you're who you say you are, doesn't check that the person that you're here to meet is expecting you and that you are booked in with the reception, that kind of thing. A lot of organizations will just assume that having someone in the reception space to kind of meet and greet visitors is enough. But like George has mentioned, if you're not ensuring that they've been given a badge verifying their kind of they are who they say they are and they are meeting the correct person, making sure that they are escorted if they need to be, making sure that no tailgating is happening coming through the main entrance, that kind of thing, or through access gates within the reception. Because ultimately, threat actors will always try to exploit trust. So they will socially engineer those people. Because if you go on LinkedIn and you look for an organization, you can find the majority of people that work at that organization. So you could walk into any reception desk and say, "Oh yeah, I'm here for this organization and I'm here to see X person." And if they're like, "Oh, okay, brilliant. Here's a visitor badge. Their office is floor 2, corridor 1." You can just walk straight up there, and you never know who you might find or what opportunity might present itself on the way. And if someone else is kind of going into that office space as well, especially in the morning or like at the start of the working day, if people are coming in to the office, tailgating in behind them, if you've got the visitor pass and you know the person's name that you're there to see, people might just let you in because that's what you suggested. So having those additional controls, like George mentioned, not just relying on that one control, especially like reception desks, because ultimately most of the time they're employed by the landlord, not by the organization that's based in the building. I've seen an example of something that I've seen that was quite useful actually was an organization. There was a reception desk in the office, kind of the building, but then this organization had implemented a secondary reception desk for their offices to ensure that there was another gate that any visitor might have to go through before they could actually access the main office. So that was quite a interesting approach that I thought was actually, yeah, that does mitigate some of that risk because you've essentially, it's a second line of defense against someone trying to gain unauthorized access into that space.
So last question for you guys. If you could only implement 3 physical controls in an organization with a limited budget, which would you choose and why?
So I think the first one would genuinely just be the training and the awareness. It's cyber, physical, etc. is probably, I'd say, one of the greatest returns on investment, really, because it's not expensive to train your team, but they can actually carry that throughout the duration of the year. Again, like the challenges, even training them on how to report if they do lose their lanyard, for example. So rather than just that concern that was somewhere, I don't know where, but actually I'll report that, so someone could just kind of block it and then, issue a new one. Same as you do with your hotel card. If you lose it, you hold your hands up, go to reception, ask for a new card rather than just try and wing it. So I think, yeah, number one control that I put in is just get people trained, get them up to date. Here's how we do things. Here's how we challenge. Don't be afraid to challenge. This is our general procedures.
Yeah, I agree. I think probably the next thing after that would be strengthening those physical access controls. So having those access cards, controlling entry points, using kind of visitor procedures, making sure people sign in, making sure if it's possible that the person they're there to meet is meeting them in reception or is being contacted by reception so that they can come down and collect that visitor. I've had examples before where I've gone to an organization, I've been at the reception desk and I've seen the email that the kind of the person I was meeting had sent to the reception desk to book me in. And it says, when I arrive at site, essentially, phone me and I will come and collect them. And I've been let kind of loose essentially by the reception, and they've not phoned that person in the office that I was supposed to be collected by. So I then went ahead and phoned them using my mobile to make sure that actually, I'm going to the right place, and that I don't just turn up and they get like suspicious about how I got there. So yeah, I think the once the training and awareness piece has been done, making sure those physical access controls are actually firstly fit for purpose, making sure that you're auditing them to make sure that they work, making sure that access cards are minimum access only. I've seen organisations that have for some unknown reason, the way that they established access was everyone at the start is given access to everything, and then based on their role, they take the access away. But I was in an organisation once where I was given a visitor pass. They took away the majority of the access, but they missed one. And I was able to, because I always, when I go to site and do a physical security audit, I always see if I can get into the server room or the networking room with my visitor pass. And on this occasion, I could. The door unlocked, and I was like, and so that raised an incident for them internally to say, well, that shouldn't be the case. Why is that? And they've now gone ahead and made it so that everyone's granted minimum privileges on their access card, and then they are added, rather than they start with everything and you take away based on role. It's they start with nothing and you add based on that role. So I think that would be the next thing beyond the kind of awareness, would be the actual access controls themselves.
I think as well, probably worth a lot of organizations keeping in mind, it's physical security. So you also do need to be concerned about actually what could physically damage items in the organization. So yes, we have fire extinguishers, but actually, when's the last time we had a test?
Yeah.
Have they actually run out? Who's responsible for that? So probably, yeah, leaning from that one into the general responsibilities as well, isn't it, really? Because if we just assume, oh, well, so-and-so does that, well, what if they're on annual leave when it's meant to be done? Are you potentially running with some that aren't actually up to date and working? Are you testing things? So again, it's, yeah, just considering that it's not necessarily all going to be malicious.
Yeah.
It'd be inadvertent as well. So funny story, I knew of an organization that hadn't considered that flooding was a possibility, and their server room was on the ground floor. So that did actually end up getting flooded, and they lost a lot of kind of vital data there. It does genuinely happen. I think it's one of those we assume just doesn't, but it can happen.
And I think the other thing there is that people presume because they're not located on a floodplain or they're on the 4th floor of an office building that flooding can't happen. But internal flooding can happen, pipes can burst, and it does happen. So it is still a risk, regardless of how small that risk might be. It is still a risk, and I've seen that as well, where I've gone in and conducting a risk assessment and asking them about their risk of flooding, and they're like, oh well, there's no chance. We're on the 12th floor of a high-rise building in like London, so we're not going to be flooded. And I was like, what about if a pipe bursts? Oh yeah, very good point. And it's that kind of, the penny drops, because sometimes it's just not a consideration. You think flooding and you think, oh well, severe rain, heavy weather warnings, oh that's the only kind of flood that we would get. But actually no, internal floods also happen as well. So I've seen a lot of organisations now, especially when I've seen worked with organisations in different parts of the world, the landlords have implemented kind of devices on the pipes in kitchens and toilets to notify if there's any leaks, so that there's a mitigation in terms of that risk of flooding actually occurring.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, guys. If anyone would like to ask George and Jack a question that they can answer in a future episode, you can either follow the link in the description, or you can just pop it in the comments. So thank you again for your time today, guys. Thank you everyone for listening today, and we'll see you next time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the InfoSec Insider podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. You can listen to the InfoSec Insider podcast on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, Podbean and YouTube.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.